Welcome to the Point. It was 10 years ago this week that this program first aired. Over the course of the last decade, if it happened in politics or government, it happened right here. We decided to start the To The Point program in October of 2003, after years of having unprecedented access to decision makers and newsmakers. We wanted a broader outlet than afforded in a normal newscast, like these statewide exclusive moments from the Decision 2000 presidential race.
I want to seize this moment to do what's right for America. And, you know, Rick, you've seen me a lot, and the more I stay out here on the campaign trail, the more invigorated I become. I'm getting stronger as the campaign goes on because the people provide strength for me. I'm one of these kind of people that feed off people.
And these.
It is rather interesting that you would choose to come to what has traditionally been a Republican stronghold like Cannon, Ottawa County to make this type of speech. What was the thinking behind that today?
Well, I think people care a lot about the environment, and they know that the environment and the economy go together. And I'll let you in on a little secret. That's not limited to Democrats.
Our interviews with both of the nominees for president obviously went longer than we had time for during 24-hour News 8. So in time, all this morning, To The Point. We developed To The Point in an effort to give a more in-depth look at political issues and campaigns. We set out to talk on a regular basis to elected officials and those who would seek elected office. Little did any of us know that a decade later we would still be here every Sunday morning. But here we are, with more issues than ever to tackle, from government shutdowns just ended and perhaps yet to come in Washington, and an upcoming election in Michigan that finds virtually everything up for grabs. But that's all for the coming year. This morning, we want to take a look back at To The Point over the last 10 years, starting with our first program, October 26, 2003.
Well, first, let me just congratulate you, Rick, on this To The Point. I think this will be a good vehicle to allow the individuals in our community to understand what's happening in state government and issues facing the citizens of the Grand Rapids as well as the state. But
then state representatives, both Republican Jerry Koyman and Democrat Michael Sack, represented the city of Grand Rapids. They were my first guests. And they talked about, among other things, financing state government and the financial problems that were becoming all too apparent. That conversation would become a staple of the program going forward. We talked with virtually everyone at every level about what would happen next with Michigan as we, as a state, led the nation in the unenviable path of economic downturn and loss of jobs that is still being felt in some ways today.
This is a challenge beyond what we certainly had envisioned at the beginning of the year. We will address it, we will fix it, and it's going to be painful.
At precisely the same time, there was an emerging election to choose the next president of the United States. This time, an incumbent Republican faced a plethora of possible Democratic opponents, and they all made it clear Michigan was an important part of their campaign strategy. So important that they gathered in Detroit for a major debate. We were there, and on our next show, we talked to the heads of the national Democratic and Republican parties.
We wanted to make sure that we could get our candidates out there in front of the public. We could help structure it so we could put our candidates in the best possible light.
What is the importance of Michigan? Democrats say they can't win the White House unless their candidate wins Michigan. What do the Republicans say?
I say that if President Bush wins Michigan next year, he will be reelected without a doubt.
We also talked to the state party chairs. Not bad for week 2. From there, we were on to important issues every week. The war in Iraq, including Saddam Hussein's capture.
Congressman Ehlers, we talked last Sunday when this was a brand new development, and here we are a week later talking about the capture of Saddam Hussein. What was your first thought when you heard this had happened?
Wonderful news, something we'd been looking forward to. It's not going to immediately change the tide of the war, but I think it could be a very important turning point.
All the while, the problems with Michigan's economy and state government finances permeated what we talked about. Governor Jennifer Granholm was a frequent guest, as when she went to Washington to hold a summit for manufacturing jobs, and we were there. You may also recognize a then future and perhaps still future candidate for president in this To The Point moment.
We sent a letter out to the governors of every manufacturing state in the country. Democrats and Republicans would have loved to have seen a bipartisan presence of the governors.
Everyone in this room that's an elected official is a Democrat. You point out that this is an election year. Was this a way to try to elevate this issue, or was this a meeting to try to make this a political issue?
Well, actually, we started out wanting this to be bipartisan. We had talked with our Republican colleagues because we think this is a national problem. We don't think it's a Democratic or Republican problem. But they know how bad the record of this administration is, and I guess we're not ready to defend it.
Just as we geared up to cover another Lansing budget showdown and the race for the White House, politics, as we had been used to covering it, came to a halt, at least for a time, as official Washington and America said goodbye to President Ronald Reagan. The nation continues to pay the respects. He passed away in June of 2004, and we were in the nation's capital to observe the tribute to the country's 40th president. Soon enough, the campaigns were back in full swing, and as we closed in on our first anniversary of To The Point, the presidential election was dominating the airwaves, and we were talking to the principals as Decision 2004 approached. Senator Kerry told us on this program just last week that he believed the president misled the American people in going to war in Iraq. Did the president mislead the American people?
Of course not. I think anybody who looks at Saddam Hussein and the regime he ran. This is one of the bloodiest dictatorships of the 20th century. They started 2 wars. He produced and used weapons of mass destruction against the Kurds and against the Iranians. He provided safe haven, safe harbor for terrorists, for Abu Nidal, for the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. He provided $25,000 payments to the families of suicide bombers who would kill Israelis, and he had an established relationship with Al-Qaeda. This was a very evil man. He was a threat to the region, a threat to the United States. We did exactly the right thing, and knowing everything we know today, we would do it again.
When you talk about the Clinton economy and the way the economy came back during the Clinton administration, you talk about several of the models he used. One of those was a substantial tax increase. The Bush administration, at least the Bush campaign, has accused you of wanting to raise taxes by hundreds of billions of dollars.
I know. Well, they're playing games with that. 98% of Americans will get a tax cut under my plan. I am going to roll back George Bush's unwise, unaffordable tax cut for the wealthiest Americans, for the people earning more than $200,000 a year. Now, they're trying to protect that, and they're trying to use that to scare people, everybody else in America.
We were talking to a lot of people about the race, even those who weren't on the ballot, and some of those who someday would be. I was looking through a website recently and I found a bumper sticker and it said Romney, 68. And it was a bumper sticker supporting your father's presidential campaign in 1968. Give me the odds that in 4 years I'll find a bumper sticker that says Romney in 08 that would be supporting your presidential aspirations.
Well, you're kind for even suggesting such a thing, but frankly, I'm working real hard to get the president reelected and overwhelmingly concentrated on a very tough job in Massachusetts. We're having the challenges that you see around the nation as we're trying to rebuild our economy. Every source of my energy is going into turning around our own state, getting us back on the right track, and I have no idea what the future may hold.
I'll take that as not a no. Governor, thank you very much for being with us. And proving that you can have a little fun on the political beat, a NASCAR legend even waded into the fray. Now the green flag's about ready to drop, so what do you say 9 days to go?
Yeah, I'd be saying watch that George Bush, because he's going to take you on the inside.
Though we talked more about going fast and turning left after the camera was off than we did about politics. In the end, it was another thin victory for George W. Bush. Here in Michigan, even if we didn't know it, there was more financial trouble ahead for the state and for those of us who lived here. The $64, perhaps, billion-dollar question is, as the revenue estimation conference is coming up in the middle of May, that's the next time you'll get a chance to look. And I know that from time to time you get some updates on revenue. Do you get any feel that after this 2 years of cutting, as you pointed out, and the executive orders, do you get any feel that revenues are starting to stabilize in the state, or is it just too early to tell?
I think I think they're starting to stabilize, but it is a little too early to tell, because as I said, the April revenues are really the ones that tell you where you're at. But our revenues, it's pretty simple. They do these economic forecasts, but our revenues aren't going to improve significantly until we grow more jobs here in our state.
2005 was a year of back and forth on Michigan's budget, and by 2006, it was election time again. And it was one for the record books, facing high unemployment and a divided state government that was making little progress against a tide of bad economic news. A well-known, well-financed West Michigan businessman said he would challenge Governor Granholm. Over the past several months, there's been a lot of speculation that you might run for governor. You're here now with a large gathering that is a political gathering in nature. Is it this time that you will confirm that you will be a candidate for governor or a nomination for governor for the GOP?
At this point, I'm able to confirm that it is my intention and my plan to run for governor in '06. And we'll be announcing a campaign sometime down the road, but I wanted to, once a decision was made, just square up and tell people exactly where I'm at.
We were there for the appearances, the debates, and the results. Governor Granholm won a second term. Perhaps as important, Democrats now controlled the state house. That was going to have a big impact. Then we didn't know just how big. And before we could find out, our community and the country once again paused to pay tribute to a man who served his country with distinction. President Ford died the day after Christmas 2006, and we were in Washington and here to say farewell. Good morning and welcome to the Point. Here in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital prepares to say goodbye to the 38th President Gerald Ford. This morning, we'll look back at, with the dawning of a new year, there were still the same old problems. The next few months seemed to be little more than a constant refrain of bad budget news and political infighting. I felt as if I'd taken up a new residence in Lansing, and many of our shows originated from there, all the way into the end of September 2007, and this live show on the eve of what by then seemed to be an inevitable shutdown. Good morning and welcome to the Point. We are live this morning from Lansing in a show unlike any that we have ever done. And I must say, on a personal note, I hope that we don't have to do again. 14 hours from now, the state of Michigan government could shut down if the legislature in this building behind me can't come up with some type of a budget solution. After agreeing to reopen government from a virtually non-existent shutdown, we talked with Governor Jennifer Granholm the next week. Good morning and welcome to the Point. We are delighted to be back in the studio for the first time in weeks and not on the steps of the Capitol. We're also very happy to have back with us Governor Jennifer Granholm as our guest. Governor Granholm, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad not to be in the Capitol with you, too.
Ultimately, there was an uneasy deal and life in Michigan went on, but it didn't get any easier. And in fact, it was about to get a whole lot worse. And not just for Michigan, but the whole country. As 2007 came to an end, we were already looking ahead to another election cycle, and this one was going to be different. For the first time in a long time, a truly open presidential campaign. I'll explain that when we come back with our 10th anniversary edition of To the Point. Welcome back to our 10th anniversary of To the Point. By January of 2008, the state of Michigan was once again operational and once again facing financial stress that would lead to an unsettling budget process, despite the fact that for the first time since she was elected, Governor Granholm had one chamber of the legislature controlled by her own party, but it didn't make deal-making much easier. We had months to go before another budget had to be done, so we talked to members about the problems and possible solutions, and we talked to a lot of them. We even hosted a town hall with Governor Granholm that we called Rebuilding Michigan's Motor. It was also that week's To the Point.
We want the legislature to give us the ability to send 100,000 unemployed or underemployed workers through training that's.
But the economic and jobs issues that we were facing were nothing compared to what was about to happen. In the meantime, the race for the White House was shaping up to be historic. For one thing, it was the first time in decades that there was not a sitting president or vice president vying for or on the ticket. It was virtually an open seat. For Democrats, it appeared that either the first female or African American to head a major party's presidential ticket would be nominated. Michigan's Democratic caucus was moved up from its previously scheduled date, causing some candidates not to participate and making Hillary Clinton's win virtually meaningless when the Democratic National Committee stripped the state party of all of their delegates. Later, the DNC met to reconsider their decision. We were in Washington for that meeting where partial voting rights for delegates were restored, but it didn't change the fact that Barack Obama would meet John McCain for the November election, and we talked to both men about Decision 2008. As president, what could you do and what would you do to put Michigan residents back to work? You're going to have to be able to capture the minds of folks to make them believe that you can do something about the economic doldrums that we have in the state. What could you do as president?
Well, number one, I'm going to try, which I think is different from the other side.
While the election was on everyone's mind, bankruptcy for one big financial house signaled the beginning of a huge market drop that caught everybody's attention. And of course, we talked about that right here. These are the folks who are right in the center of what has become a huge economic storm. Then it was on to a new administration, and words like stimulus and bailout became regulars every Sunday morning as the relative merits and disadvantages of President Obama's economic plans generated a lot of talk on To The Point. As 2009 unfolded, so did those conversations. And as so often has been the case when it comes to big, complex economic issues, there were two well-defined sides that never seemed to come together. In the meantime, and you may be sensing a pattern here, the 2010 election was already on the minds of more than a few politicians. We headed to Mackinac Island to talk with prospective candidates to replace the term-limited Jennifer Granholm. Good morning and welcome to The Point. This week on Mackinac Island, the dreary weather has matched the conversation about Michigan's economy. But there are a group of people that have a bright future in store for Michigan. A whole lot of those are running for governor. As it turns out, the Democrats' ultimate nominee wasn't in the early horse race, and the apparent frontrunner then, Lieutenant Governor John Cherry, ended up not running at all. As 2010 emerged, we geared up for that massive election year. True enough, there was no presidential race, but every seat in the State House and Senate was up for a vote, and we talked with a lot of candidates for those offices. There was also a changing of the guard in some of the U.S. House seats. Both Congressman Pete Hoekstra and Vern Ehlers said they were not running for re-election. In the 2nd District, where Hoekstra had served for nearly 2 decades, there was a big field and a spirited primary. Bill Huizenga was the ultimate victor. He won in the general and is still serving. In the 3rd District, the fireworks came in the general election, and here, on To The Point.
And so you are manufacturing goods in China.
That is false. That is flatly false.
So the products that are distributed by Michigan Industrial Tools do not have made in China on them? They're not manufactured in China?
We trade with companies that manufacture in China, but our business does not manufacture in China.
Justin Amash won and is now serving his 2nd term. His Democratic opponent, however, Patrick Miles, didn't settle for a consolation prize. He is currently the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Michigan. As a political reporter, there are few things more frustrating than a candidate for office who doesn't want to debate his opponent. As candidates for office, there are a few things more infuriating than political reporters who demand that they do so. As it turned out, there was only one real debate between Democrat Virg Bonero and Republican Rick Snyder in 2010. It was on the east side of the state and produced very little in the way of new information. But just because we couldn't get the candidates to sit down together, it didn't mean we couldn't match them up. We asked both candidates the same questions at different times and then matched up their answers for a kind of digital debate. It remains one of the more positively received shows that we've ever done. In the end, Rick Snyder became governor. Republicans took back the House, and they held the Senate and set up single-party rule in Lansing for the first time in 8 years. Everything was about to change, but before the calendar and administration turned over a new page, one of our more frequent guests paid us one more visit.
People will look back and say this was a period of enormous contraction and enormous change under the foundations of Michigan's economy.
A new year, a new governor, a new agenda, and a new catchphrase.
Of relentless positive action.
The governor set about changing tax policy created at the height of Michigan's economic crisis, getting a budget done in record time, and irritating Democrats along the way, and that was just the beginning.
These seniors all across the state feel duped by the governor.
Now our Sunday morning shows began to focus on the policies of two relatively new chief executives. President Obama, a lightning rod for Republicans who had taken back the U.S. House in 2010, and Governor Rick Snyder, a source of scorn for Democrats who complained he was a Robin Hood in reverse. The year came to an end with the anticipation of a big race for president in 2012 and promises of more surprises from the Snyder administration. Republicans who had been battling President Obama from practically his first day in office held high hopes of winning the White House in 2012. In Michigan, perhaps those hopes were even higher because the son of a former governor of the state looked to have a shot at getting the nomination. Mitt Romney had been there before and come up short. This time it proved to be another difficult fight, with the primary going longer than some thought was profitable for Republicans, but ended with a Romney win in Michigan and for the nomination. And Republicans here thought they had their best shot to win Michigan in a general election since 1988. Governor, every 4 years, men and women running for president make a lot of promises. Republicans, not picking on Republicans, very often talk about smaller government, less spending. You're talking about that. George W. Bush talked about that to some degree, and other Republicans, but government keeps getting bigger. Spending keeps getting bigger. Deficits keep getting bigger. What can you tell the American people, the people of Michigan, to convince them that this time, if you're elected, government might get smaller, spending might get less?
Well, Republicans, I think, did not keep faith with the American people in letting government getting larger and larger when we were in charge, and now the growth of government has become even more outrageous.
But Democrats had won in the general presidential election since Bill Clinton first ran, and they already had their ground game in motion. This really could come down to be one of the make or break states when you look at the electoral map, right?
Absolutely. We feel real good about Michigan. If you look at the polling data, which can change in a heartbeat, we're in better shape here in Michigan. It should be a state. We're really taking nothing for granted, though. This is a state we have to win. You're going to be seeing a lot of me here, because this is sort of a microcosm of America.
When the dust settled, the Obama-Biden ticket won Michigan and re-election, but the election wasn't quite over, at least not here. A ballot initiative statewide that would have put collective bargaining in the Constitution failed. End of story, right? Not quite. The Republican-controlled legislature and Governor Snyder decided to double down on that idea and instead pass right to work in Michigan, the home of the UAW. And it was a battle royal with the outcome perhaps already predetermined. Right to work passed, the governor signed it, and now it is law. And that brings us to 2013. This year, we've already seen clashes between Republicans and Democrats in Lansing and Washington. Sequester, government shutdown, debt ceiling, and default, all words you have heard a lot. And may hear again as we wait to see what kind of a deal Washington can come up with to fund government before the first of the year. There has been much more, of course, in 10 years, dozens of issues and topics. 2 ballot issues, for example, that were hotly debated here on the show that are currently being decided by the courts after being decided by the voters. Who should be allowed to be married, and if affirmative action is appropriate for college admissions. We've been here for all of that and much more for a decade. When we come back, one final thought and the answer to an often asked question. To the point. I get asked a lot of questions about politics and politicians. One frequently asked question, what was your favorite interview? In honesty, there are a few that I wouldn't consider on some level to be favorites. I've talked with every person who's held the office of President of the United States since Gerald Ford, senators and congressmen and governors, even a few world leaders thrown in. But the interview that always comes to mind when I think of favorites is one we did early on in To the Point. Former Senator George McGovern was in West Michigan. We had a chance to talk to him. I wondered how the former Democratic presidential nominee would react as we talked about a broad range of subjects. I was more than pleasantly surprised to find him candid and highly entertaining. In fact, he made an unsolicited confession that I suspect is true for many politicians, but he is the only one who's admitted it on To the Point.
Well, I have to confess, every 4 years I wish I were running again. I guess that White House bug, once it bites, you're afflicted for life.
Senator McGovern died just over a year ago. He was 90 years old. I want to thank all of our guests over the last 10 years. Without them, we wouldn't have a show. And to all of the folks here at Wood TV who help produce this program every week. Likewise, without them, there would be no program, so my thanks. And mostly thanks to you, the viewing audience, for joining me every Sunday at 10 o'clock. It has been a fun decade, and here's to another information-packed year. And yes, another election cycle has already begun. That means I'll see you here next week. To the Point.